Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm making a video similar to the one that I made last. The last video was pretty much all the baits throughout the Bassmaster Elite Series season that made the top 10. I figured out which ones made the top 10 the most, so pretty much which baits throughout the entire year made the most money. This one I thought would be kind of interesting because it's a good way to kind of compare what a schedule can do and formats can do to those baits. So I went through the Bass Pro Tour, the MLF Bass Pro Tour tournament schedule, and figured out which baits made the top 10 the most through their season. So if you're not familiar with it, they fish a different format. It's an every fish counts, but they got to be at least 2 pounds. And they also fished a different schedule pretty much by, they were fishing a different part of the country at a different time of the year. The Elite Series had a couple tournaments in Florida, and there was a lot of spawning tournaments in there, and definitely the format and the format and the location in the country and the time of the year I feel like really affected this. But I'm going to go through all the baits with you guys, what did the best, and it is different than the Elite Series by quite a bit on a lot of these. The numbers are a little different. If you watched the last video, a lot of the baits were used like 20 times, 18 times and stuff. On the MLF side, on their top 10 baits, it seemed, or the top baits that they use out of the top 10, it seemed like they narrowed it down a little bit more. It was generally 1 or 2. It wasn't, they held up 3 for the majority of the time or anything. So there's not as many to go off of, but it's kind of the same effect. There's ones clearly on top, and then it kind of trickles down from there. But anyway, I'll go through these with you guys. Pretty much they started in Louisiana in February. They had 2 February tournaments and then a couple in March, which I didn't do the Red Crest and the heavy hitters in this, because also in the Elite Series tournaments I didn't include the Classic. I'm just going at least so that it's kind of controlled, same field and everything every time, because obviously heavy hitters is going to affect these, and the Red Crest is going to affect these because it's different field sizes and just a different style of tournament. But anyway, let's get to the #1 bait from the MLF Bass Pro Tour last year throughout the entire country, the entire season. Clear winner was the drop shot. Now, if you watched the last video, the drop shot on the Elite Series did do well. Definitely wasn't the top one, but on the MLF side, it definitely seemed like it showed up earlier in the season. So it was like they were up north before the drop shot really ever showed its face on the Elite Series, but the drop shot was already starting to eke out in the top baits before they ever went up there. And then once they went up north, it was the clear winner. But drop shot, #1 bait in the top 10 throughout the entire year last year. Second is now actually, so this was the first on the Elite Series. It's the second on theirs. And really the only reason it's there is because of the Bussy Break and Darbone or whatever tournament in Louisiana. It was used heavily there. I think it got almost probably 8, I think, of these numbers right around there from just the first tournament. But the Creature bait came in at #2 bait used throughout the entire year, which that's different than the Elite Series in the way that they used it, though. A lot of the time that they were using it during the tournaments in the Bass Pro Tour, it was more of just like flipping bushes and stuff. A lot of the Elite Series, they were using it for bed fishing a lot of the time. But anyway, second was a Creature bait at 13, so actually quite a bit behind the drop shot. But it was definitely different, I guess, is all I can say from the schedule. The way that it was used from one to the other, it made it there, but it also made it there in a completely different way. I don't really know how to add to that. But just anyway, third on the list is the jig. It came in at #11, also a one that produced really, really well in the Elite Series. But kind of what I'm getting to, which we'll talk about it more as it goes down through here, is the drop shot was obviously a clear winner, which when you're trying to catch more fish, that makes sense. But the creature bait and the jig, and there was a lot of flipping going on, which was also the time of the year that affected that. But in a time when live scope is supposed to be the clear winner, to the key to dominating any tournament series, you're seeing a lot of other baits that are producing pretty well aside from that. Now, I'm not saying that live scope didn't play in a lot of this stuff, but throughout entire seasons, you're seeing certain baits really, really, really producing well that were not being used along with live scope. But I saw a lot of people flipping a jig throughout the MLF series, which they had a Lake of the Ozarks tournament that they were able to bed fish on. I think that was really one of the only tournaments through the season that was heavily bed fishing tournament. The other ones, Bussy Break and Darbone, Lake Fork, Lewis Smith, those were earlier in the season, and then they jumped and did kind of one bed fishing tournament, and then it was June on Watts Bar, and they had Red Crest and heavy hitters in between there. So definitely affected things. But after that, something that didn't produce well in the Elite Series was pretty far down the list that actually did better in this. But I will say that it was kind of the same thing as the Elite Series, what I said when I was talking about that on that tour when it came to the deep crankbait, was that you don't need it all the time. Absolutely not. You can easily go an entire season and not have a deep crankbait in your boat and do fine. But there's always like one tournament on a schedule where just everybody's using it. And it was kind of weird. There was a lot more people using it in the Cayuga tournament on this series. That was the tournament that jumped the deep crankbait up there. It was tons of people using it. But after the deep crank, that was at 7. Next up, actually, sorry, tied with it, was the jerkbait. And I think really that's way higher on the list than the Elite Series. But again, the jerkbait, I think, is totally up there because of live scope was able to be utilized a lot more. They fished a lot earlier in the year, a lot of tournaments that you could actually even worry about using it. But definitely on the MLF side, you're seeing baits that you can use to produce a few more bites and stuff, eking their way up to the top, because I think that's just strictly format and time of the year. But then after that, something that finished really high in the Elite Series is the chatterbait. Was at 6, and a shallow crankbait was at 6, which I think the shallow crankbait on the Elite Series kind of produced about the same. Something that did better in the MLF side than it did on the Elite Series side, coming at with 5 times in the top 10 throughout the entire season, is a spinnerbait. And then something that, and this is another thing, that they didn't do enough bed fishing tournaments and springtime tournaments where they were fishing for spawning fish instead of pre-spawn. The Cinco was only there 3 times. And then the next one up, same thing as the Elite Series. I'm just surprised that this, in this live scope era and everything, with as many pre-spawn tournaments as they had, that a swim bait, and that's not including a glide bait like I did on the Elite Series. I didn't include those together. A swim bait is in a soft body swim bait, whatever size, which it generally, I don't think in either one I've seen a big soft body swim bait. It's just swimmers, but 3 times throughout the entire season is kind of weird to me. But again, that's what they're reporting, I guess. Plastic worm is next up. It produced a lot more in the Elite Series, 3 times in the top 10 throughout the entire season for the Bass Pro Tour. And then we have 2 times that the trap showed up and 2 times that the Demiki rig showed up. Also kind of surprised on the Demiki rig again, not showing up more throughout some of those tournaments. And then we have 4 of them tied at 1 for the entire season, only showed up 1 time. Really only one of these is surprising. Glide bait, Jacob Wheeler was able to utilize it. I think it was on Lake Fork. And then ice jig, which you rarely see that ever pop up as somebody's main bait in the top 10. That was also Jacob Wheeler. And I think that one was on Lewis Smith that he was able to use the ice jig. And then a hair jig, which that one was not the same as the Elite Series. They were using, I pretty much was lumping marabou jigs in as a hair jig, and this one wasn't fished that way. I think it was one that was used on Watts Bar, I believe, I think is what that hair jig was off of. And then Ned rig, I was really surprised that that one only showed up one time in the top 10 throughout the entire season. But anyway, that's kind of a rundown of everything. But to loop back around to what I was saying is that I do feel like that just consistently there's these certain things that seem to produce on any schedule. It seems like any time throughout the year that the jig shows up, jigs just show up a ton. I think a jig was second or third on the Elite Series, and then third on the Bass Pro Tour. And then creature bait just seems to, because there's so many spring tournaments, I think is the deal with that jigs and creature baits, they're just able to use them a ton. I will say the jig, I saw more football jigs on the MLF side, but anyway, definitely some surprising ones in there. I always like to point out that as much hype as a glide bait gets, it produced horribly on the Elite Series and it produced horribly on the Bass Pro Tour. Not surprising. That's not a tournament bait, as many people say that it is or try to hype it up. That's one thing that I think is more of a fun fishing bait and should probably be kept in your box during tournaments, because as reported, it doesn't do well. But definitely just the trusty old school stuff, I guess, that supposedly aren't doing well in tournaments do seem to actually produce really well across the board, because those are two completely different formats, two different times of the year, two different tours, and there's certain things that just are there at the top on both of them. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope this kind of helps everybody out and is interesting to those tournament guys out there like me, because I'm always interested in information and stuff like this. But thanks for watching. See you on the next one.